"You're too old for this." Everyone mocked him, not knowing he was a legendary supercar mechanic. The sound of expensive engines filled the air as Harold shuffled through the gleaming glass doors of Elite Motors, the city's most prestigious luxury car dealership, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he clutched a worn baseball cap to his chest. The contrast couldn't have been more striking. While polished Ferraris, Lamborghinis, and Porsches gleamed under pristine showroom lights, Harold appeared like a ghost from another world. His coat, once perhaps navy blue, had faded to an indeterminate grey, patched in several places with mismatched fabric. His shoes, held together more by hope than leather, squeaked softly against the immaculate marble floor. Days of stubble covered his gaunt cheeks, and his silver hair hung in unkempt strands beneath the faded cap he now nervously rotated in his hands. The mechanics working in the service bay noticed him immediately. Their crisp uniforms bore the Elite Motors logo, and their tools gleamed as brightly as the cars they serviced. These men took pride in their work, earning substantial salaries, maintaining vehicles worth more than most people's homes. They had seen wealthy clients, demanding customers, and celebrity car owners, but never had someone like Harold wandered into their domain. Marcus, the head mechanic, was the first to spot the elderly man approaching. At 35, Marcus had worked his way up through determination and skill, becoming the go-to expert for the dealership's most challenging repairs. His reputation was built on precision, efficiency, and an unwavering confidence in his abilities. He nudged his colleague, Jake, who looked up from the Porsche 911 Turbo S he'd been struggling with for 3 hours. The black Porsche sat like a sleeping giant in the service bay, its engine cover removed, revealing the complex machinery within. Jake had diagnosed the problem as a rare issue with the turbocharger system, but despite replacing several components and running multiple diagnostic tests, the engine continued to produce an irregular idle and concerning knocking sounds. The car's wealthy owner, a prominent businessman, had made it clear that he needed the vehicle back by evening for an important event. Harold cleared his throat softly as he approached the work area, his voice barely above a whisper when he spoke. The mechanics had to strain to hear him over the ambient noise of the garage. His words were simple, humble, almost apologetic. He explained that he had noticed them working on the Porsche from outside and wondered if he might be able to help. He assured them he wouldn't charge anything, that he simply wanted to be useful. The response was immediate and brutal. Laughter erupted from the group of mechanics, echoing off the high ceilings of the service bay. Marcus shook his head in disbelief, while Jake openly scoffed at the suggestion. Their words cut through the air like knives, each comment designed to put Harold firmly in his place. They questioned his mental state, his sobriety, and his understanding of just how expensive and complex the vehicle before them truly was. The mockery continued as other staff members gathered, drawn by the commotion. They pointed out that Harold's appearance suggested he couldn't afford to own a bicycle, let alone understand the intricacies of a $250,000 supercar. Some suggested he was probably looking for handouts or trying to run some sort of scam on wealthy customers. Harold stood silently through the verbal assault, his shoulders gradually sagging under the weight of their derision. His weathered face showed no anger, only a deep sadness that seemed to emanate from years of similar treatment. The bright lights of the showroom cast harsh shadows across his features, emphasizing every line and wrinkle that spoke of a life filled with struggle. Yet something flickered in Harold's pale blue eyes as he gazed at the troubled Porsche. Despite the humiliation, despite the laughter still ringing in his ears, he couldn't help but notice details about the engine that the mechanics had missed. His fingers twitched slightly, muscle memory from decades of experience, recognizing patterns and problems that others couldn't see. The scene was set for something extraordinary, though none present could have imagined what was about to unfold. Sometimes the most profound moments in life come disguised as ordinary encounters, and sometimes the people we dismiss hold secrets that could change everything we think we know. If this story touched your heart, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories. that remind us never to judge others by their appearance. Leave a comment below telling us where you're watching from and what time it is there. We love connecting with viewers from all around the world. Despite the stinging humiliation, Harold remained rooted to his spot near the service bay, his eyes never leaving the black Porsche that had captivated his attention from the moment he entered the dealership. The mechanics had returned to their work, occasionally glancing his way with mixture of annoyance and amusement, expecting him to shuffle away in defeat like so many other down-on-their-luck individuals who sometimes wandered in seeking charity or odd jobs. But Harold didn't move. Instead, he observed with the intensity of a hawk studying its prey, noting every tool they used, every component they touched, every frustrated gesture they made as their attempts to solve the Porsche's problems continued to fail. Jake had now spent nearly 4 hours on the vehicle, his initial confidence eroding with each unsuccessful diagnostic attempt. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the climate-controlled environment of the service bay. He had replaced the turbocharger's wastegate actuator, cleaned the fuel injection system, and even swapped out several sensors, yet the engine's irregular behavior persisted. The mysterious knocking sound that occurred only at specific RPM ranges had become his nemesis, mocking his expertise with every failed solution. Marcus joined his colleague, bringing additional diagnostic equipment and a second set of experienced eyes to the problem. Together, they represented over 20 years of combined experience working on luxury vehicles, yet the Porsche continued to confound them. The dealership's reputation hung in the balance. They had never failed to deliver a repaired vehicle on time, and the client expecting this car was not someone they could afford to disappoint. Harold watched their methodical approach with growing concern, not for his own situation, but for the mechanics who were clearly struggling with something he recognized immediately. His trained eye had spotted the real issue within minutes of observing their work, but his earlier reception had made it clear that his input would not be welcomed. Still, something deep within his conscience wouldn't allow him to simply walk away when he possessed the knowledge to help. The hours passed, and Harold's presence gradually faded into the background noise of the busy service center. Customers came and went, other vehicles were serviced successfully, and the normal rhythm of the prestigious dealership continued around him. Yet he remained, a silent sentinel watching over the troubled Porsche like a guardian angel that no one believed in. As the afternoon wore on, the pressure in the service bay became palpable. Phone calls from the vehicle's owner grew more frequent and increasingly terse. The dealership manager made several visits to check on progress, his expressions growing darker with each update. Jake's hands had developed a slight tremor from stress and caffeine, while Marcus found himself questioning diagnostic procedures he had performed thousands of times before. It was during this mounting tension that Harold finally gathered the courage to approach once more. His voice, still soft but carrying a note of genuine urgency, cut through the mechanical sounds of the garage. This time, he didn't offer his services in general terms. Instead, he spoke specifically about the Porsche's condition, mentioning technical details that made both mechanics stop their work and look at him with surprise rather than derision. Harold pointed to a specific area of the engine bay, describing a component that wasn't immediately visible and explaining how a particular type of failure in that system would produce exactly the symptoms they were experiencing. His words carried the weight of deep understanding, spoken with the quiet confidence of someone who had encountered this exact problem before. The mechanics exchanged uncertain glances. Harold's assessment was far more sophisticated than they had expected from someone of his appearance, and his suggested diagnosis addressed aspects of the problem they hadn't fully considered. Yet their pride and professional egos made it difficult to acknowledge that this homeless stranger might possess knowledge they lacked. Jake looked at his watch, then at the Porsche, then back at Harold. The deadline was approaching rapidly. Their reputation was on the line, and they were running out of options. The choice before them was becoming increasingly clear: continue struggling with their current approach and risk failure, or swallow their pride and listen to the unlikely advisor who had appeared in their midst. The tension in that moment was electric, like the pause before thunder follows lightning, as Harold stood quietly waiting for their decision, his weathered hands still clutching his worn cap, his eyes filled with hope that his offer might finally be accepted. The silence that followed Harold's technical explanation stretched like a taut wire ready to snap, heavy with the weight of wounded pride battling against desperate necessity. Marcus was the first to break, his professional integrity overriding his initial judgment as he studied Harold's weathered face with new eyes. Years of experience had taught him to recognize genuine expertise when he encountered it. And despite the man's humble appearance, there was something in his manner of speaking about the Porsche's condition that resonated with authentic knowledge. The specific terminology Harold used, the way he described the engine's behavior patterns, and his understanding of the interconnected systems, all pointed to a level of expertise that couldn't be faked or learned from casual observation. Jake remained skeptical, his arms crossed defensively as he glanced between his colleague and the homeless stranger who had somehow managed to articulate their problem more clearly than their sophisticated diagnostic equipment. The young mechanic's pride stung from hours of failed attempts, and accepting help from someone who appeared to have nothing felt like admitting defeat in the most humiliating way possible. Harold sensed the internal struggle playing out before him and chose his next words carefully. He spoke softly about his observation that the knocking sound occurred in a very specific pattern, happening only when the engine reached certain temperature thresholds, combined with particular RPM ranges. He mentioned that this type of failure often involved a component that most mechanics would overlook because it appeared to be functioning normally under standard diagnostic procedures. The precision of Harold's analysis cut through the mechanic's skepticism like a sharp blade through fabric. These weren't the words of someone guessing or trying to impress them with automotive jargon picked up from magazines or television shows. This was the voice of someone who had encountered this exact scenario before, possibly many times, and understood the subtle relationships between systems that only came from decades of hands-on experience. Marcus made the decision that would change everything. He stepped aside, gesturing toward the Porsche with a mixture of curiosity and resignation, inviting Harold to show them what he believed was wrong. The gesture was small but monumental, representing a bridge across the vast chasm of assumption and prejudice that had separated them since Harold first entered the dealership. Harold approached the vehicle with a reverence that surprised both mechanics. His dirty, weathered hands moved over the engine components with surprising gentleness, like a pianist preparing to play a beloved composition. Despite his disheveled appearance, his touch was confident and precise, displaying an intimate familiarity with the mechanical symphony before him. What happened next defied all expectations and challenged everything the mechanics thought they knew about expertise and appearances. Harold's hands seemed to know exactly where to go, moving with muscle memory developed over countless hours working on similar engines. He didn't need diagnostic equipment or reference manuals. His fingers found their way to components with the certainty of someone returning home after a long journey. Within moments, Harold had identified a small, seemingly insignificant part buried deep within the engine bay, a component that their diagnostic equipment had reported as functioning within normal parameters. He explained that this particular piece had a tendency to develop hairline cracks that wouldn't show up on standard tests, but would cause exactly the type of irregular behavior they had been experiencing. The mechanics watched in growing amazement as Harold demonstrated his point, showing them signs of wear and stress that they had completely overlooked. His explanation of how this seemingly minor failure created a cascade of problems throughout the engine's performance was delivered with the calm authority of a master craftsman sharing knowledge with eager apprentices. Jake found himself leaning closer, his skepticism rapidly transforming into fascination as Harold continued his assessment. The homeless man's understanding of the Porsche's systems was not just competent, it was extraordinary, displaying a depth of knowledge that surpassed even their most experienced colleagues at the dealership. As Harold's hands worked with increasing confidence, both mechanics began to realize they were witnessing something remarkable. This wasn't just a lucky guess or beginner's luck. They were observing the work of someone who possessed a level of expertise that belonged in the highest echelons of automotive craftsmanship. The question that began forming in their minds was no longer whether Harold could help them, but rather who this mysterious man really was and how he had come to possess such incredible knowledge. What unfolded in the next few minutes would be spoken about in hushed, reverent tones throughout Elite Motors for years to come, a moment when the impossible became reality and assumptions crumbled like ancient walls before truth. Harold's transformation was nothing short of miraculous. The trembling in his hands disappeared completely as he settled into his element, replaced by the steady confidence of a virtuoso returning to his instrument after a long absence. His weathered fingers moved through the engine bay with surgical precision, each movement purposeful and economical, wasting neither time nor motion as he navigated the complex maze of components with an intimacy that spoke of countless hours spent in similar environments. The first tool Harold selected was not the sophisticated electronic diagnostic equipment that the mechanics had relied upon, but rather a simple screwdriver from Jake's workbench. His choice seemed almost primitive compared to the high-tech instruments surrounding them, yet he wielded it with the skill of a master craftsman who understood that the most effective solutions often came from fundamental knowledge rather than expensive technology. Marcus and Jake watched in stunned silence as Harold began dismantling sections of the engine with movements so fluid they seemed choreographed. Each component he removed was placed in a precise location, creating an organized system that would allow for seamless reassembly. His actions demonstrated not just mechanical knowledge, but the kind of spatial intelligence and systematic thinking that separated true masters from merely competent practitioners. The faulty component Harold had identified was buried beneath several other systems, requiring the removal of multiple parts to access properly. Most mechanics would have needed at least an hour to reach this particular piece, consulting manuals and taking careful notes to ensure proper reassembly. Harold reached it in less than 15 minutes, his hands navigating the mechanical labyrinth as if guided by an internal map drawn from decades of experience. When Harold finally extracted the problematic part, both mechanics gasped audibly. The hairline crack he had predicted was exactly where he said it would be, so small that it was barely visible to the naked eye, yet positioned in such a critical location that it had been causing the cascading failures throughout the engine's performance. Their sophisticated diagnostic equipment had completely missed this microscopic flaw because it fell outside the parameters of standard testing protocols. Jake knelt beside Harold, studying the damaged component with newfound respect and growing amazement. The crack was so precisely located and so perfectly explained the symptoms they had been battling that it seemed impossible for someone to have identified it without extensive investigation. Yet Harold had spotted it within minutes of observing the engine, demonstrating a level of diagnostic ability that bordered on the supernatural. Harold's explanation of the repair process was delivered with the patience of a master teacher, describing not just what needed to be done, but why each step was necessary and how the various systems would interact once the repair was completed. His knowledge encompassed not just the immediate problem, but the broader relationships between all the engine's components, revealing an understanding that went far beyond simple mechanical competence. The replacement part needed was fortunately in stock, and Harold's installation process was a masterclass in precision engineering. Every bolt was tightened to exact specifications without consulting torque charts. Every connection was made with the confidence of someone who had performed similar procedures thousands of times before. His movements carried the rhythm of expertise, each action flowing naturally into the next without hesitation or doubt. As Harold worked, other mechanics and service advisors began gathering around the Porsche, drawn by whispered conversations and the unusual sight of their colleagues watching someone else work with such intense fascination. Word spread through the dealership that something extraordinary was happening in Service Bay 3, and even customers began lingering nearby to observe the mysterious homeless man who had somehow become the center of everyone's attention. The engine reassembly proceeded with mechanical poetry, each component finding its proper place under Harold's skilled guidance. His hands moved with the confidence of someone who could perform this work blindfolded, yet his eyes remained sharp and focused, checking and double-checking every detail with the meticulousness of a craftsman who took personal pride in perfection. When Harold finally completed the repair and gestured toward the ignition, the assembled crowd held its collective breath, understanding that they were about to witness either vindication or embarrassment for the unlikely mechanic who had captured their complete attention. The moment when Harold's weathered hand reached toward the Porsche's ignition switch seemed to stretch into eternity, charged with anticipation so thick it could be felt by everyone gathered around the service bay. Marcus positioned himself near the diagnostic equipment, ready to monitor the engine's performance parameters as Harold brought the repaired vehicle to life. Jake stood closer to the engine bay, his trained ear prepared to detect any irregularities in the mechanical symphony about to unfold. Other mechanics formed a loose circle around the workspace, their conversations reduced to whispers as they prepared to witness either a miraculous vindication or a spectacular failure. Harold paused for just a moment before turning the key, his pale blue eyes reflecting a quiet confidence that seemed to emanate from some deep well of certainty within his soul. This wasn't the hesitation of uncertainty, but rather the contemplative pause of someone who knew exactly what was about to happen and wanted to savor the moment before everything changed. The first turn of the key activated the Porsche's electrical systems, dashboard lights illuminating in their familiar pattern as the vehicle's sophisticated computers began their startup sequences. Harold's hand remained steady on the key, waiting for the optimal moment to engage the starter, demonstrating an understanding of the engine's requirements that went beyond simple mechanical knowledge. When Harold finally turned the key to start the engine, the Porsche responded with an immediate rumble that sent vibrations through the concrete floor of the service bay. But this wasn't the irregular, troubled sound that had plagued the vehicle for days. Instead, the engine caught with the smooth, powerful voice of a finely tuned machine awakening from slumber, each cylinder firing in perfect synchronization to create the distinctive growl that had made Porsche engines legendary. The transformation was instantaneous and undeniable. Where before there had been hesitation, rough idling, and concerning knocks, now there was only the pure, confident roar of mechanical perfection. The engine's voice rose and fell smoothly as Harold gently pressed the accelerator, each RPM increase flowing seamlessly into the next, without the slightest hint of the problems that had confounded the dealership's best mechanics for hours. Marcus stared at his diagnostic equipment in disbelief, watching as every parameter displayed perfectly normal readings. Engine temperature, oil pressure, fuel mixture, timing advance, every measurement fell precisely within optimal ranges, creating the kind of diagnostic readout that mechanics dreamed of achieving. The same engine that had been throwing error codes and producing irregular performance just minutes before was now performing flawlessly under every conceivable measurement. Jake's mouth hung open as he listened to the engine's voice, his trained ear detecting nuances of performance that confirmed Harold's repair had addressed not just the immediate problem, but had somehow optimized the entire system. The Porsche wasn't just running normally, it was running better than it had since leaving the factory, with a smoothness and power delivery that suggested Harold's work had somehow enhanced the engine's natural capabilities. The crowd of onlookers erupted in spontaneous applause, their appreciation for Harold's extraordinary demonstration overriding any earlier skepticism or prejudice. Service advisors who had initially suggested calling security to remove the homeless intruder now found themselves applauding his remarkable achievement. Customers who had witnessed the transformation began asking each other who this mysterious expert could be and how he had acquired such incredible skills. Harold allowed himself a small smile as he listened to the engine's perfect voice, an expression of quiet satisfaction that spoke of a craftsman's deep pleasure in work well done. He had not only solved the problem that had stumped the dealership's best technicians, but had done so with an elegance and efficiency that elevated the repair from simple problem-solving to the level of artistry. The Porsche's owner, who had arrived expecting to collect his repaired vehicle, stood among the gathered crowd in stunned amazement. He had brought his car to Elite Motors because of their reputation for excellence, expecting competent service from their certified technicians. Instead, he had witnessed something that transcended ordinary mechanical work, a demonstration of expertise so profound that it challenged everything he thought he knew about skill and knowledge. As Harold stepped back from the vehicle, his work completed to perfection, the silence that settled over the service bay carried a weight of recognition and respect that had been entirely absent when he first shuffled through the dealership's doors just hours earlier. The question that hung in the air, unspoken but present in every observer's mind, was no longer about Harold's ability to fix the car, but rather about who this remarkable man truly was, and what extraordinary story had brought such incredible talent to their doorstep, disguised in the humble clothing of society's forgotten. The thunderous applause that followed Harold's miraculous repair gradually faded into a hushed reverence, replaced by an almost sacred silence, as the gathered crowd struggled to process what they had just witnessed. Marcus was the first to find his voice, though his words came out as barely more than a whisper filled with awe and confusion. His question hung in the air like morning mist, asking what everyone was thinking but afraid to voice. Who was this remarkable man who had accomplished in minutes what their best efforts couldn't achieve in hours? The head mechanic's professional pride had been transformed into genuine admiration, his earlier skepticism replaced by a burning curiosity about Harold's background and experience. Other voices joined in, creating a gentle chorus of inquiry rather than interrogation. Jake asked about Harold's training, wondering where someone learned to diagnose problems with such precision and efficiency. A service advisor inquired about his previous work experience, trying to understand how such extraordinary skills had been developed and refined. Even customers who had witnessed the demonstration found themselves drawn into the conversation, their questions reflecting the same mixture of amazement and curiosity that had captured everyone present. Harold stood quietly in the center of this growing circle of interest, his weathered hands once again clutching his faded cap as he considered how to respond to their questions. The transformation from mocked intruder to celebrated expert had happened so quickly that he seemed almost overwhelmed by the sudden reversal of fortune. His pale blue eyes moved from face to face, seeing genuine interest and respect, where just hours before there had been derision and dismissal. The questions continued to flow, each one revealing more about the depth of Harold's knowledge and the mystery surrounding his current circumstances. Someone asked about his familiarity with Porsche engines specifically, leading Harold to share that he had worked extensively with German engineering throughout his career. Another person inquired about his diagnostic techniques, prompting Harold to explain his approach to reading an engine's behavior through subtle signs that others might overlook. As Harold began to share fragments of his story, a picture started to emerge of a man whose life had taken unexpected turns despite his extraordinary capabilities. He spoke modestly about decades spent working with high-performance vehicles, mentioning experiences that spanned multiple continents and prestigious automotive brands. His references to racing teams, celebrity clients, and exclusive workshops painted a picture of someone who had once moved in the highest circles of automotive excellence. Jake pressed for more specific details, asking about particular techniques and specialized knowledge that Harold had demonstrated during the repair. Harold's responses revealed not just competence, but mastery of advanced concepts that most mechanics encountered only in theoretical discussions. He spoke casually about engine modifications that cost more than luxury cars, about diagnostic challenges that would stump teams of engineers, about performance requirements that pushed mechanical systems beyond their intended limits. The more Harold shared, the more questions arose about how someone with such remarkable abilities had ended up in his current circumstances. The contrast between his obvious expertise and his humble appearance created a puzzle that everyone present was eager to solve. Marcus found himself wondering if Harold might be some sort of undercover expert, perhaps researching the industry or testing the dealership's standards in some unusual way. A customer who had been listening intently to the conversation suddenly stepped forward with a question that changed the entire dynamic of the discussion. She asked Harold if he had ever worked on Formula One cars, mentioning that his diagnostic approach reminded her of stories she had heard about legendary mechanics who could identify problems that escaped entire teams of engineers. Harold's response to this question brought a new level of intensity to the conversation. His modest acknowledgement that he had indeed worked in Formula One, combined with his reluctance to elaborate on specific details, created an air of mystery that made everyone even more curious about his background. The casual way he mentioned working with teams that most people knew only from television coverage suggested experiences that went far beyond ordinary automotive work. The atmosphere in the service bay had completely transformed from the mockery and dismissal of Harold's initial reception to something approaching reverence. People began to realize they might be in the presence of someone whose reputation and achievements far exceeded anything they had initially imagined, someone whose current circumstances told only a small part of a much larger and more remarkable story. As the questions continued, and Harold's answers revealed more tantalizing glimpses of his extraordinary background, the crowd's curiosity evolved into genuine concern about understanding not just who he was, but how he had arrived at this point in his life. The revelation came gradually, piece by piece, like dawn breaking slowly over a landscape that had been hidden in darkness, as Harold's carefully guarded past began to emerge through the gentle persistence of his newfound audience. It was Marcus who finally asked the direct question that everyone had been circling around since Harold's miraculous repair of the Porsche. His voice carried a mixture of respect and curiosity as he inquired about Harold's full name, explaining that his level of expertise seemed familiar, as if they had encountered references to his work before without realizing the connection. Harold's response sent shockwaves through the assembled crowd. When he quietly stated his full name, Harold Hammer Morrison, the reaction was immediate and electric. Jake literally stumbled backward, his face pale with recognition and disbelief. Marcus dropped the diagnostic scanner he had been holding, the device clattering against the concrete floor as the significance of Harold's identity registered fully. The name Harold Hammer Morrison was legendary in automotive circles, spoken with the same reverence reserved for the greatest innovators and craftsmen in the industry's history. Stories of his work had become the stuff of legend, passed down through generations of mechanics like sacred texts, describing achievements that seemed almost mythical in their scope and precision. Marcus found his voice first, his words tumbling out in an excited rush as he recounted some of the stories he'd heard about Harold's career, the legendary mechanic who had single-handedly solved engineering problems that had stumped entire teams at Ferrari, the master craftsman who had developed modifications that became standard practice throughout the racing industry, the diagnostic genius who could identify mechanical failures by sound alone, often from hundreds of feet away. Jake joined the recitation of Harold's achievements, his voice filled with the kind of awe typically reserved for meeting childhood heroes. He mentioned the famous story of Harold diagnosing a critical engine failure during the Monaco Grand Prix by listening to radio coverage from his hotel room, calling the pit crew with specific instructions that saved the race. The incident had become part of Formula One folklore, though few people had ever connected the story to a specific individual. Other voices added to the growing litany of Harold's legendary achievements. Someone mentioned his work with exotic supercars for Middle Eastern royalty, projects so exclusive that most people had only heard whispers about their existence. Another person recalled stories about Harold's innovations in turbocharger technology that had revolutionized performance in multiple racing series. The customers who had witnessed Harold's repair found themselves in the presence of automotive royalty, someone whose contributions to the industry had influenced virtually every high-performance vehicle they had ever driven. The homeless man they had initially pitied or ignored was revealed to be one of the most respected and influential mechanics in modern automotive history. Harold accepted their recognition with characteristic humility, acknowledging his past achievements while maintaining the same modest demeanor he had displayed throughout the afternoon. His responses to their excited questions revealed not arrogance or ego, but the quiet confidence of someone who had spent decades perfecting his craft and took genuine pleasure in sharing knowledge with others who appreciated the intricacies of mechanical excellence. The transformation in how everyone viewed Harold was complete and irreversible. Where they had once seen a down-on-his-luck homeless man seeking charity, they now recognized a master craftsman whose knowledge and experience represented a treasure trove of automotive wisdom. His shabby appearance no longer registered as a mark of failure, but rather as evidence of life's unpredictable turns and the irrelevance of external circumstances when measuring true worth. Marcus asked the question that everyone was thinking but afraid to voice. How had someone of Harold's stature and reputation ended up in his current circumstances? The inquiry was asked with genuine concern rather than idle curiosity, reflecting the respect and admiration that had replaced their initial dismissive attitudes. Harold's answer to this crucial question would reveal the final piece of his story, explaining not just his current situation, but also demonstrating the resilience and dignity that had sustained him through whatever challenges had brought him to this moment in the elite Motors service bay. Harold's explanation of his journey from legendary status to homeless wanderer unfolded like a masterclass in life's unpredictable nature, delivered with the same quiet dignity that had characterized his approach to the Porsche repair. The story began with success beyond most people's imagination. Harold described his peak years when his reputation commanded fees that exceeded many people's annual salaries for single diagnostic consultations. Racing teams would fly him across continents to solve problems that had stumped their best engineers. Wealthy collectors trusted him with vehicles worth millions, knowing that his touch could restore even the most challenging mechanical issues to perfect condition. But success, Harold explained, had come with unexpected costs and pressures that gradually eroded the foundation of his carefully built life. The demands of his reputation required constant travel, leaving little time for personal relationships or normal social connections. His dedication to perfection became an obsession that consumed every aspect of his existence, turning his greatest strength into a source of isolation and eventual downfall. The first crack in Harold's seemingly perfect life came when his wife, unable to compete with his devotion to engines and racing circuits, filed for divorce after 23 years of marriage. The settlement, combined with his own poor financial management, during years when money had seemed unlimited, devastated his accumulated wealth. Harold's focus had always been on mechanical systems rather than financial ones, leaving him vulnerable to advisors who took advantage of his trusting nature and preoccupation with his craft. A series of poor investment decisions recommended by people he had trusted wiped out the remainder of his savings just as the automotive industry began changing in ways that reduced demand for his traditional skills. Computer diagnostic systems started replacing the intuitive mechanical knowledge that had been Harold's greatest asset. Younger technicians with digital training could perform many functions that had previously required decades of experience to master. Harold's pride prevented him from adapting quickly to these changes. Instead of embracing new technologies, he clung to traditional methods that were becoming increasingly obsolete in a rapidly evolving industry. Potential employers began viewing his legendary status as a liability, fearing that his reputation would make him inflexible and expensive compared to younger, more technologically oriented mechanics. The final blow came when Harold's arthritis, developed from decades of precision work with his hands, began affecting his ability to perform the intricate manipulations that had made him famous. The same hands that had once moved through engine bays with surgical precision now trembled with pain and stiffness, betraying him at the moment when he most needed their reliability. Within 2 years, Harold had lost his home, his professional identity, and most of his personal possessions. The man who had once commanded respect from automotive royalty found himself sleeping in shelters and searching for odd jobs to survive. The contrast between his past and present circumstances was so extreme that it seemed like the plot of a tragic novel rather than the true story of someone standing before them. Yet Harold's narrative was delivered without self-pity or bitterness. Instead, he spoke about the lessons he had learned during his fall from grace, insights about the difference between professional success and personal fulfillment, about the importance of human connections over material achievements, about the dignity that exists in all honest work, regardless of its prestige or compensation. His time on the streets had taught him perspectives that decades of success had never provided. He had learned to find satisfaction in small acts of kindness, to appreciate the basic necessities that he had previously taken for granted, to understand that expertise and knowledge retained their value even when the external trappings of success disappeared. Harold's story resonated deeply with everyone listening, not just because of its dramatic reversals of fortune, but because it illustrated universal truths about resilience, humility, and the unexpected ways that life tests even the most accomplished individuals. His journey from legend to outcast, and potentially back to recognition, demonstrated that true expertise transcends circumstances, that character reveals itself most clearly during adversity, and that society often fails to recognize the value that exists in unexpected places. The service bay had become a classroom where Harold's life story served as a powerful lesson about judging others, about the temporary nature of external success, and about the enduring value of knowledge and skill, regardless of the circumstances in which they are found. The silence that followed Harold's story was profound and respectful, filled with the weight of recognition as everyone present absorbed the magnitude of what they had witnessed and learned. Marcus was the first to break the silence, his voice thick with emotion, as he addressed Harold with a formal tone that reflected the respect the legendary mechanic had earned through both his demonstration of skill and the dignity with which he had shared his story. The head mechanic's words carried the authority of someone speaking not just for himself, but for the entire Elite Motors organization, as he extended an offer that would change Harold's life once again. The offer was comprehensive and generous, reflecting not just sympathy for Harold's circumstances, but genuine recognition of his extraordinary value to their operation. Marcus explained that Elite Motors would be honored to have someone of Harold's expertise join their team, not as a junior mechanic starting at the bottom, but as a master craftsman whose knowledge could elevate the entire service department's capabilities. The compensation package Marcus outlined was substantial, including not just a competitive salary that reflected Harold's true worth, but also comprehensive benefits, housing assistance to help him re-establish himself, and most importantly, the respect and recognition that his skills deserved. The dealership's general manager, who had been summoned to witness Harold's demonstration, added his own endorsement to the offer, emphasizing that they viewed Harold not as a charity case, but as an invaluable addition to their team. Jake stepped forward to add his own voice to the chorus of support, acknowledging how much he had learned just from watching Harold work on the Porsche and expressing genuine enthusiasm about the opportunity to learn from someone whose expertise exceeded anything he had encountered in his career. His earlier skepticism had been completely replaced by eager anticipation of the knowledge he could gain from working alongside a true master. Other mechanics and service advisors joined the conversation, each adding their own expressions of welcome and respect. The transformation in their attitudes was complete and sincere, reflecting not just guilt over their initial treatment of Harold, but genuine appreciation for the extraordinary individual who had revealed himself through his actions and story. Harold listened to their offers with visible emotion, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he processed the magnitude of the opportunity being extended to him. The same hands that had just performed mechanical miracles on the Porsche now shook with the overwhelming realization that his darkest period might finally be coming to an end. The customers who had witnessed Harold's transformation from dismissed vagrant to celebrated expert began sharing their own reactions to the extraordinary afternoon they had experienced. Several expressed regret for their initial assumptions, acknowledging how Harold's appearance had led them to prejudge his worth and capabilities. Their comments reflected a broader recognition of how easily society overlooks valuable individuals based on superficial characteristics. The Porsche's owner, a successful businessman who had initially been frustrated by the delay in his vehicle's repair, now found himself in the unique position of having witnessed automotive history in the making. He approached Harold with genuine gratitude, acknowledging that he had received far more than just a repaired car. He had been present for a demonstration of excellence that would remain with him for the rest of his life. Word of Harold's remarkable achievement began spreading throughout the dealership and beyond. Service advisors called colleagues at other locations to share the incredible story. Customers texted friends and family about the extraordinary experience they had witnessed. Social media posts began appearing, documenting the afternoon when a homeless man revealed himself to be one of the automotive industry's greatest legends. Harold's response to the outpouring of support and recognition was characteristically humble. He expressed genuine gratitude for their offers, while acknowledging that the afternoon had given him something even more valuable than employment. It had restored his faith in human nature and his belief that expertise and knowledge would ultimately be recognized and valued regardless of external circumstances. The formal acceptance of Elite Motors' offer came not through dramatic speeches or elaborate ceremonies, but through Harold's simple nod of agreement and quiet expression of thanks. His decision represented not just a return to professional life, but a validation of the principle that true worth transcends temporary circumstances, and that society's capacity for recognition and redemption remains alive even in times when superficial judgments seem to dominate. As the afternoon drew to a close, the service bay that had witnessed Harold's transformation began returning to its normal rhythm. But the impact of what had occurred would resonate far beyond that single day. Harold's story would become part of Elite Motors' culture, a reminder to all employees about the importance of looking beyond appearances and recognizing that expertise and wisdom can arrive in the most unexpected packages. The black Porsche, now purring with mechanical perfection, served as a tangible reminder of Harold's extraordinary capabilities, and the afternoon when assumptions were shattered, prejudices were overcome, and a legend was rediscovered through the simple act of allowing talent to reveal itself, despite the humble circumstances in which it appeared. 3 months after that transformative afternoon at Elite Motors, Harold Morrison stood in the same service bay where his life had been forever changed. But now, everything about his circumstances reflected the remarkable journey from despair to redemption that had begun with a simple offer to help with a troubled Porsche. Harold's physical transformation was remarkable, though it represented far more than just improved grooming and professional attire. The same weathered hands that had once trembled with uncertainty now moved with renewed confidence and purpose as he guided younger mechanics through complex diagnostic procedures. His eyes, previously dulled by hardship and rejection, now sparkled with the enthusiasm of someone who had rediscovered his passion and found his place in the world once again. The respect Harold commanded at Elite Motors extended far beyond his technical expertise, though his contributions to the service department had been nothing short of revolutionary. His diagnostic abilities had reduced average repair times by 30%, while simultaneously improving customer satisfaction scores to record levels. More importantly, his willingness to share knowledge and mentor younger technicians had elevated the entire team's capabilities and created a culture of continuous learning that attracted top talent from across the region. Harold's influence reached beyond the technical aspects of automotive repair into the broader culture of how the dealership approached customer service and professional development. His story had become a powerful reminder about the importance of looking beyond surface appearances and recognizing that value and expertise could be found in unexpected places. New employees received orientation sessions that included Harold's story as a foundational lesson about respect, humility, and the danger of making assumptions based on first impressions. The success of Harold's reintegration into professional life attracted attention from throughout the automotive industry. Trade publications featured articles about his remarkable comeback story, using his experience as a case study in both the value of experienced craftsmen and the importance of second chances. Racing teams that had once competed for Harold's services began reaching out again, seeking his consultation on challenging projects that required his unique combination of intuitive understanding and technical precision. Yet Harold's greatest satisfaction came not from renewed professional recognition, but from the relationships he had built with his colleagues and the knowledge that his expertise was being passed on to a new generation of mechanics. Jake, who had been among the most skeptical of Harold's initial offers to help, had become one of his most dedicated students, absorbing not just technical knowledge, but also Harold's philosophy about approaching mechanical problems with patience, respect, and genuine curiosity. Marcus had been promoted to service manager for the entire regional division, with his success attributed largely to the team-building and mentorship culture that Harold had helped establish. The head mechanic frequently credited Harold with transforming not just their technical capabilities, but their understanding of what it meant to be true professionals in an industry where expertise and character mattered more than appearances or credentials. The customers who had witnessed Harold's initial demonstration continued to request his services specifically, spreading word about the legendary mechanic who had returned to active practice at Elite Motors. Their loyalty was based not just on Harold's undeniable technical skills, but on the extraordinary story of resilience and redemption that his presence represented. Harold's personal life had also undergone dramatic positive changes. The stable income and renewed sense of purpose had allowed him to secure comfortable housing and re-establish connections with family members who had lost touch during his darkest period. His arthritis, while still present, no longer limited his work thanks to proper medical care and ergonomic accommodations that Elite Motors had willingly provided. More significantly, Harold had discovered that his experience with homelessness and professional downfall had given him insights and empathy that enhanced his ability to connect with others facing similar challenges. He began volunteering at local shelters, sharing his story as evidence that circumstances could change and that every individual possessed value that might not be immediately apparent to others. The black Porsche that had served as the catalyst for Harold's transformation had become something of a legend itself, with its owner bringing it to Elite Motors for all service needs and proudly sharing the story of its repair with anyone who would listen. The vehicle served as a tangible reminder that extraordinary moments could emerge from ordinary circumstances, when expertise met opportunity and prejudice gave way to recognition. As Harold looked around the service bay that had become his professional home once again, he reflected on the journey that had brought him from the heights of success through the depths of despair and back to a place of respect and purpose. His story had become more than just a personal redemption. It had evolved into a powerful testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the importance of never judging others based on their current circumstances rather than their intrinsic worth and potential. The afternoon sun streaming through the service bay windows illuminated not just the gleaming vehicles awaiting Harold's expert attention, but also the transformed life of a man who had learned that true success was measured not by external recognition alone, but by the impact one could have on others and the legacy of knowledge and wisdom that could be passed on to future generations. Harold's story would continue to inspire long after that remarkable day when he first shuffled through Elite Motors' doors, serving as an enduring reminder that expertise, dignity, and worth transcend temporary circumstances, and that society's greatest treasures are often found in the most unexpected places, waiting for someone wise enough to look beyond appearances and recognize the extraordinary individuals who walk among us every day. If you enjoyed this amazing story, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and comment below, telling us where you're watching from and what time it is in your city. Your participation is essential for us to keep bringing stories that touch the heart. See you next time.